I want to start just at the very beginning of your career and just walk through chronologically from the undergraduate experience, the entry into banking, and how you've climbed the ranks. And so, for this first chapter, you're going to be giving us a bit of a sense of how people can understand breaking into the industry, what this industry looks like, and coming from a semi-target school and things like that. And so, when you first arrived at BYU back in the day, like what did you think your career path was going to look like? I'm sure you hadn't really heard of PCA banking, maybe not even investment banking broadly. And so, was that even something in your line of sight at the time?
No, it really wasn't. I was just a very eager kid from Kansas City, who certainly had never heard of investment banking. Definitely not secondaries. I knew that accounting was a thing, and finance was a thing. I think I had it in my head maybe that I wanted to be a personal financial planner, or something like that, because I liked the idea of working with money. But really didn't know, and did exactly what I think every student should do, which is just be very open-minded, exploratory, do a lot of internships. Doing a few internships here and there, convinced me pretty quickly that financial planning wasn't maybe the right thing for my future. Um, and then ultimately, I met a very special friend named Max Adams, who told me all about his route to investment banking, and we became fast friends. And I was convinced against my will to commence the recruiting process for IB.
Well, I'll take it. I was glad to meet Carson as well and talk about this thing that I was so obsessed with when I was an undergrad. And I guess maybe all of the talking about the interest, the intellectual intrigue, the prestige, and of course the chance to make a decent paycheck rubbed off on him. But coming from BYU, which Carson and I both went to for undergraduate, which is I would say at the time was mostly a non-target, but has become a little bit more of a semi-target for certain banks over time, where there's a few elite boutiques and a few bulge brackets that consistently recruit there. And so, what did that Wall Street recruiting landscape look and feel like for you at that time, going through the process for the first time as a sophomore, freshman, junior, trying to think about banking?
Yeah, it's interesting how the target non-target distinction has kind of changed over time. I mean, I
Hmm.
like consider Jefferies, PCA, for instance. We recruit regularly from BYU, from other schools. So it's certainly a place that we consistently go to as a pipeline for students. You definitely have to be proactive coming from a school like BYU. However, I mean, I'd say that they do very well in two things. The first is really preparing students with the cultural assimilation and the
Hmm.
information to do well in investment banking interviews and processes. So they have,
Yeah.
I think at the time they had the investment banking club. I think it might have been renamed now, but that did a great job of, if you attend that every single week, you could learn how to do the technicals, you could learn,
Hmm.
um, how to go about reaching out to upperclassmen. And then the second thing is really is the alumni networks, which I think BYU does, as well as any other school. Where alumni really are very willing to, get on the phone to be helpful, to, help you to, understand what the recruiting process looks like at their bank, and to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. So the information, some of these infrastructures to help you actually understand what the industry looks like and how to get in. But what were some of the structural disadvantages, if any, that you noticed in terms of going to a non-target or semi-target versus a target school? Like, was there anything that you had to fight sort of an uphill battle to overcome there?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is that there's no default recruiting pipeline
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
many banks to,
Yeah.
what in reality what are most schools, right? Like every bank has their pipelines that come from different schools, but if you're in a school that's not in one of those pipelines, you have to be a little bit more proactive and creative in order to make your
Yeah.
place. What I'd say though is, I think it's actually a good proxy for what investment banking itself is kind of like. If you have a
Hmm.
client and you're looking to help advise on a transaction for them, or help to create a relationship with them, you don't always have a steady pipeline into that client,
Hmm.
and so you need to be creative. You need
Yeah.
to be somebody who others will give referrals for. right?
Hmm.
And I think it's a good proxy. I think coming from a non-target and the creativity and the gumption that's required to get in
Hmm.
the door, it's actually very similar to I think making client relationships.
I really like what you're saying there, where to some extent, investment banking and private equity and growth equity and venture capital, they're really cool jobs because they force you to do the job to get the job. And so I don't know if that
Right.
exists in really any other industry, but in order to source a job in growth equity, for example, you have to kind of like source companies and bring them to interviews. And in order to source a job in investment banking from a non-target school, like you're saying, you have to go out there, build relationships, get people to vouch for you. And 20 years down the line, hopefully they'll vouch for you in terms of signing you up as the banker for their deal. So one other thing that you've brought up in the past a little bit, Carson, that I think is very interesting is how the pipeline has changed since you were in school. And over the last decade or so, something that I've noticed, and I think you've noticed this too, is that the Wall Street pipeline really has expanded beyond the Ivy League. And part of that is competition from, call it tech jobs and AI jobs and working in other industries that a lot of like the top graduates from Stanford or MIT or Harvard are going to or something. But as a result of that, something that I've noticed a lot is how much more competitive it is to get into some of these internships. And so I think like back when closer to when I was recruiting and when you were recruiting, like Goldman Sachs, for example, had something like a 5% acceptance rate. And then you fast forward 10 years and it's closer to like 0.6, 0.7%. And so to some extent, that's a double-edged sword where the democratization of these finance jobs has opened up beyond these like core schools where people recruit on campus. And so that means that there's just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people applying. And so for example, last year, I think JP Morgan had like 500,000 plus applicants for like 4,000 positions or something in investment banking. And so even though it has gotten so much more intense, that said, it still was really freaking hard back when you were recruiting for this. And so walk us through the process of getting those first finance internships. Like I remember that you were absolutely a machine at networking. And so what was the technique for getting in front of people and actually building out those relationships so that you can break into this incredibly intense industry?
Yeah, I mean, getting started, there's always the chicken and the egg problem, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
any prospective employer wants you to already have experience, but in order to get experience, you need to already have had experience.
Yep.
What I did, so I think I sort of woke up uh, the first semester of my sophomore year, realized
Mm-hmm.
I needed to get internships under my belt. Um, Parsed the whole junior and senior cohort within the finance
Mm-hmm.
program at BYU on LinkedIn and wrote down the list of 100 to 150 students that I
Mm-hmm.
thought had roles that I would be interested in. Now that ranged from investment banking, private equity, corporate finance. It was all sorts of different internships that these
Mm-hmm.
students had had. I think I correctly viewed those students as being the first layer of connections that I might
Yeah.
build, who might be able to tell me, where it was that they got their sophomore and junior internships. So I
Mm-hmm.
reached out.
Mm-hmm.
I actually got together with a friend of mine. It was somebody else, it wasn't you, who and we. And we printed out sheets of paper and wrote down questions, for each of those students, and wrote out emails asking to connect.
Cool.
And we probably had 50 or so different meetings with these students. For me, that was
Yeah.
helpful both in just understanding, what is a corporate finance internship, what is an investment banking internship, but then also
Mm-hmm.
knowing, what were the actual steps that they went through in order to kind of get their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, so you had, 50 plus conversations. You parsed out this entire database. Like that's the sort of hustle that I think gets you a job on Wall Street. Like a lot of students, they don't realize that in fact they do need to reach out to hundreds of people. And in fact, the conversations with alumni or upperclassmen, those are going to be the easiest ones that you have. And so I'm sure after you did that, you went on to go and talk with hundreds of people in the industry itself that had already graduated. And so let's talk about that process next. So you started talking with the upperclassmen, you learned what you were interested in. Then what was the actual investment banking recruiting process like? Like, how was that recruiting? Did you apply for a bazillion different jobs or did you get lucky with just a few?
I definitely kept my net wide. I mean, I think everybody does. It's important
Mm-hmm.
to do that. I had an advantage where my one of my parents worked for American Airlines at the time, and I actually had some standby flight benefits, and
Mm-hmm.
so I could fly to New York or San Francisco fairly easily. It wasn't a very
Hmm.
cost intensive thing for me, and I had some friends who I could stay with, and so pretty frequently, I think 4 or 5 times over the course of,
Hmm.
sophomore and junior year, I was in either New York or in San Francisco. Meeting
Hmm.
with bankers, asking about their jobs and trying to get connected and kind of on their list of students who they might consider when it comes times for internships. But I'd say,
Hmm.
I think looking back, maybe I'd spread my net a little too wide in the sense that I really think that there's some advantage, particularly for niche product or sector groups, to
Yeah.
developing some level of focus on those groups or expertise. Like, and sitting in the shoes that I'm in now in PCA and secondaries, it comes across very clearly when there are students who are particularly focused on PCA, for instance.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think just looking back, like that's maybe something that I would have changed about my approach, is being a little bit more
Hmm.
focused on, maybe developing
Yeah.
niches that I was more excited about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So the sort of the depth versus the breadth. But I just want to go back for a second. Carson is the guy who literally flew out to the cities that he was trying to recruit for 5 times or something like that during undergrad. And that is absolutely incredible. That is a huge degree of commitment that most people don't do once, let alone 5 times. And so you had this incredible advantage. And I think most students could benefit from copying that, where you get that in person FaceTime that really makes you stand out much more than like a phone call or a Zoom call does. And so I assume that that was probably imperative and to some extent in developing some of those relationships. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the very least, just having met somebody in
Hmm.
person really increases the chances that you'll be remembered at all, positively or negatively, when it comes time to look through the stack of resumes and pick who gets the super day spots. So,
Hmm.
I think you want to do it tactfully. There's a way to do
Hmm.
it that's not tactful, and you want to be respectful of people's time because
Hmm.
obviously these are professionals that are very busy. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a huge part of my recruiting experience, was trying to meet people in person.
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something I've noticed where the students who've reached out to me, and I've had hundreds of students reach out over the years, and the ones who like actually showed up in person were like, "Hey, can I, grab a coffee with you or something like that, or can I buy lunch for you?" Like obviously, I'm not going to make a student pay lunch for me, but like that sentiment of like I took the time to come out and visit you, and I really, really am interested in your bank, and like I'm making this sign of good faith that I'm gonna like buy you a coffee just to like chat about it. That really does signal intensity and interest in a way that's hard to ask in an interview. But let's zoom back. So during the time when you're recruiting, like the odds of getting some of these jobs is probably like 10% or less on average. And some of the banks that were more competitive were probably way less than that, and some maybe a little bit higher. And so for students who didn't get an investment banking job out of undergrad, but they still know that they want to do it long term, like what advice would you give them on how to set themselves up for a long-term successful career and maybe the path to break into finance or investment banking later on down the line?
Yeah, look, I mean, banking is just one of many different possible career paths that you can go
Well, it's
down. I
not
mean,
the
I think
only thing in the
a
world. Are
lot
you
of
kidding me?
bankers. It's not the only thing in the world. I think a lot of bankers themselves will say don't go into it. So it's like maybe one of the only professions where bankers directly will put up roadblocks for people
Hmm.
to get in, because there's really like
Yeah.
a special type of person that I think we're wanting to join. But what I'd say for those students is, and this is just my general advice for young professionals, is to find something that is technical in some
Hmm.
way. Um, I really think that that is a launch pad to develop
Hmm.
business acumen, to develop your understanding of technical concepts. And it translates very well. If you have learned one technical skill set and you've demonstrated that you've learned that, then I think that translates well, and you can credibly say you can learn others. Whereas if you haven't, then I think
Hmm.
it's just harder to do that, particularly as you get older. So that's my view.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It is kind of a funny industry where a lot of the time they're like saying, don't do this if you don't want to." And I think it's probably one of the only industries on the planet where the people can afford to say that, because most industries they're like, like come work for us. We need you. We need bodies. We need people. But investment banking is so popular these days and so competitive that a lot of the times they're saying like, if this isn't a perfect fit for you, like don't waste our time. Like, go do something else. This is a hard job. Realistically, you're going to have a better fit and better experience if you do something that's a little bit more fun for you.